We're continuing today. We're on page 109 of our journal. We're continuing with our Rabbi series, where we're exploring the model of life that Jesus gives to us. We're confessing, really, as a people, that Jesus, he not only shows us the way to God, but he also shows us the way to be human, the way to live our lives properly. And if we just simply care about Jesus as the one that saved us, and not also as the one that's showing us the way, then we kind of only engage with half of the Jesus that we find in Scripture. I'm joined today by my friends Tyson and Bob. We had a short discussion as to how we should arrange ourselves, in what particular order, smartest to least smart, youngest to oldest, but we settled, well, I suggested we should sit in order of attractiveness, but Bob said that was unkind because he didn't think I was worse looking than Tyson. So
Or truthful to most.
Bob and I were chatting. We saw a little window in our schedule opened by Heather not doing Breathe in a few weeks' time. So Bob and I are going to sing for you that night. And it's funny, Bob, how they all thought that was a joke.
I know.
Just so quick to judge. Actually, what we're going to do that night is we're going to run a seminar based on this Rabbi series. It's coming up for Easter, and so a lot of Easter times you'll notice some sort of stories start running in the newspaper. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Was he really killed? What was going on? And these stories kind of create a little uncertainty around us sometimes in our faith. So Bob and I wanted to run a seminar on that night, the 5th of April at 7 o'clock. We're going to run that. We've decided to somewhat cheekily call it Fake News, What Really Happened at Easter. So we'd love you to join us there as we talk about the Easter story and hopefully help you continue in a certainty around these stories that we tell at Easter time. Rabbi A.Y. Cook said this: "I don't speak because I have the power to speak. I speak because I don't have the power to remain silent." Rabbis were a fan of the conversation. They liked to talk. They actually, if you ever read rabbinic writings from around about the time of Jesus, what you don't get is like a book of theory as to this rabbi's ideas. What you actually find are conversations, and they've preserved the rabbinic texts as conversations. This rabbi said that, but then this rabbi answered with this thought. And basically the power of talking was hugely important to them because the ability to think and listen were important to them. For us, sometimes we think about learning and how it works is you simply listen to one person talk, and if you can replicate what they've already said, then you've learned. But the rabbis felt that learning was as much about listening as it was about talking and conversing and being present in the conversations that you're having. I don't know about you, but one of the challenges of perhaps being present and conversing in our contemporary world is the volume of data that we all encounter. Our world is no longer short of information, would you say? We're not short of words either. Think about how many words you encounter in a day. Have you ever tried to count them? As to how quickly you are bombarded with billboards and ads and letters and magazines and newspapers, television commercials, radio broadcasts, everyone's personal favorite, spam, which back in the day used to be a bad meat. Now it's a bad letter. And, catalogs, junk mail, phone calls, text messages, and if you're my age or older, fax machines. They were a form of communication, if you're younger than me, that we thought was cool in the 80s. So cool that the guy that designed Back to the Future thought we'd still be using it today. And perhaps our biggest challenge for all of us when it comes to words, endless email. Think about how far you have to go to escape words. Where can you go nowadays to get away from someone on their cell phone? It's pretty hard to get away from the sort of chatter that's coming along. The kind of immersion that we have in words is huge, but in the process, have our words become cheap? Have we become worse at talking? Have we less, perhaps, to say than we used to? The average newspaper presently has more information in it, in one newspaper, than the average man would have encountered in his entire life in the 1850s. There's 5 times more info that you're exposed to on a daily basis than your friends in 1985 would have encountered. 5 times more information comes past you in the course of a day than it did 31, 32 years ago. But that actually pales in comparison to the amount of information that you generate in the course of a day via your own email and Twitter and social networking and text messages and the likes. If you use the analogy of an 85-page newspaper, in 1986, you received about 40 newspapers worth of information in a day, right? By 2007, you were receiving 174 newspapers worth of information in the course of a day. In 1986, the average person would produce information in their own life in one day that was equivalent to 2.5 pages of a newspaper. Today, you produce the equivalent of 6 newspapers worth of information. You're constantly generating information. And the scary thing is, and you know this if you've ever looked at your doctor's computer screen, other people are generating information on you at the same time, which leaves us in this sort of place that we're kind of information overloaded. And I wonder sometimes if we as Christians would have preferred it if God had saved us with information. If Jesus had come and said, if you just give me a USB stick, I'll give you a data dump, and you can just plug that in and everything will be sorted because you'll have all the information. But Jesus didn't come and save us with information. He didn't come and save us with ideas even per se. What we find in Jesus and why we talk about him in the way that we do is we found a person that came, that walked amongst us, that guided us, that showed us a way to live. And he did this by talking. Jesus was a talker. How often you see Jesus engaged in conversation. Now think about this. We're in here talking about Jesus, Son of God made flesh. And he spent most of his time talking with us. We all focus on the Easter story, but before we get to the Easter story, pages and pages of Jesus talking with people, and really talking. Not just the kind of talking that we do where I talk and then I stop talking while you talk, and while you're talking, I think about what I'm going to say when it's my turn to talk again. Jesus talked and listened. Jesus listened to what people were saying and shaped his conversations around that. Here's an example in Luke chapter 19, verse 1 to 10. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter. It's words, you see. "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." Bob, talk to us about this story.
Or Robert, as it says there. Which
I'm
you
trying.
put on there.
I know, and but I'm trying.
I know.
Habits die hard.
And people are in a quandary right now. What do we call you? Whatever you want. The story we've just read is a story of a greeting that becomes a conversation, and a conversation that becomes a moment of transformation. And that's the big piece for today, is the transforming power of conversation. Zacchaeus' life is going to take a radical turn because Jesus stops and enters into conversation with him. And I could have chosen any number of passages for this principle because it's something that Jesus is always doing. We're aware of that. Something that is so ordinary and so human. So when we think of Jesus as a teacher, we think of him, we have to think of him 2 ways. We have to think of him as standing in front of a group, making a presentation, but he was also a conversationalist, and a really good one. I mean, to study the conversations of Jesus is a really good thing to do. There are over 40 conversations or interactions of Jesus with individuals in the gospel. So it's something so ordinary and close at hand and so human that it's easy to miss the power of what he's doing. And I think, and you made reference to it, one of the things Jesus is doing in showing us the way is not only the way to be different, but the way to be what we've always been, only to take it more seriously. And in this sense, I think Jesus is valuing the common, ordinary, everyday things of human existence: eating and sleeping and working and conversing. And I think matters to us because then all of a sudden we realize this is holy work to converse and enter into conversation in a matter that goes beyond the surface, to really talk. Jesus grounds us in our humanity. And so we want to take this serious in terms of what it means to be a conversationalist and to follow that way of Jesus. And I want to highlight this, the value and significance of gracious conversation, which will push past surface talk and look for those moments when something meaningful can be said. Something meaningful. You never know when a word can help someone. I know in my own life when a word will deeply strike to my heart and it becomes more than just mere talk. It's something that my soul can feed on. So I've been digging into this over these last few years, the idea and practice of conversation. There are books involved. Yes, there are. But there's also just this thing to observe, watch, and then pay attention to what you're actually involved in. Pay attention to what's going on in a conversation. And it's fascinating. 3 things I want to mention this morning. First, just to enter into conversation is to signal value. We do this. We know what life is like. We enter into a room and we say, who do I want to talk to, right? We're signifying value when we do that. If you just sat and sort of watched the flow of traffic and all that's going on, there's something going on with that. Who do you want to talk to? So to value a person is to give them time and space. And time is important. But as David already mentioned, it's that listening part that is valuing. Listening actually is the expression of love. To listen is to love. So think of Jesus the Master listening to us. Think of him in the home of Zacchaeus actually listening to the man Zacchaeus. And then second, to converse is to risk being revealed. And this is sometimes why we don't want to enter into conversations with certain people, or maybe conversation at all. I know a line in Sherlock Holmes where Sherlock sort of gives away his sleuthing mechanism. He says, get people to talk. Just get them to talk. And if they talk, they'll reveal themselves. And this is true, right? When we listen to somebody and really listen, or even when we take time to listen to ourselves, we'll hear what's leaking out of us. Our confusion, our anger, right? Our bitterness, our hope, our thankfulness, our dependence on God. It'll leak out of us. And so it all comes out in our words. Conversations reveal. And then I think thirdly that a conversation can lead to a discovery. And this is an interesting thing. One of the fascinating pieces of conversation is you start somewhere, and then if you follow the trail, you say, well, we started here and we ended up way over there. How did we get there? Fascinating. Something was said, something was responded to, and then you realize you've followed a trail over to here. And if grace is involved, and if Jesus is involved, and this is where I'm interested in the presence of Jesus in conversations, something has been revealed through that, where you found out that you were in a place that you didn't expect to get to. There was a revelation that happened. One of the reasons we might fear conversation is precisely this. We're afraid, and so we keep it surface. But what would it mean to push a little deeper and to ask a better question or to listen a little harder? And here's what I deeply believe then, that conversation where Jesus is present can change our lives. And it's ironic in this age of communication, which Tyson is going to talk about somewhat in his piece, that the original method of interchange, face-to-face, just talking, seems both threatened and threatening in our times. You know, if I say to you, we need to talk, you're probably scared at that phrase. Or if someone says to you, we need to talk, it sounds threatening. But church, we need to talk. We need conversations. We really do. So in the story we just read, Jesus is passing through. That's what it says. He's on his way to Jerusalem, important business. He's actually going to enter into the critical moment in his dying and rising. But he stops, doesn't he? He stops because a significant moment has just inserted itself. There's a man who wants to be seen. And like you, I miss significant moments. I try to pay attention, but I do miss significant moments. But when I catch them and I realize, hey, I've stumbled upon a significant moment, It's a beautiful thing to wake up to. Here is the moment while I was on my way to some appointment or some meeting. Here is the moment of significance right now. Jesus passing through encounters Zacchaeus. And don't miss the significance of how this starts. Zacchaeus wants to see Jesus, and evidently he wants to be seen. So here's the critical move I try to remember: to keep my eyes open and my ears attentive to people who want to talk. Can't talk to everyone. It's impossible. But there are significant moments always in the interaction of, even on a Sunday morning, when somebody wants to be seen, and that begins a moment of conversation and maybe, perhaps, moves to a moment of transformation. In the Zulu language, I'm told that the words for hello are simply, I see you. What a tremendous, powerful way to live. The way of Jesus is to see and then to enter into conversation. So that simple principle, be open to those who are looking for you, and take seriously the searching eyes that say, can we talk? Jesus shows us a way. And the way is the way that we always live, except to say, let's deepen it. Let's take it as more meaningful and more significant and more transformative than perhaps we've ever thought about. David.
The second story that we'll just share with you is from Luke chapter 10. And it goes like this: as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Tyson, talk to us about this story.
Yeah, so this is an interesting passage that I've had the privilege of having a few conversations around with different people. And I think there's some really interesting points of reflection for us. And so here's what I love about this text, is that Martha, as Jesus is passing through, Martha opens the door to her home. She swings it wide open as she wants Jesus to come in and to be a part of what's going on in her home. But the second that Jesus walks in the door, she immediately goes back to work. She just goes back to preparing all the things that needed to be prepared. And we find Mary, her sister, become present to a moment where she goes and she sits at the feet of Jesus. She's able to remove the distractions of the world around her, the busyness of the world around her, and become present to the conversation that was going on around the room with Jesus at that moment. And we see Martha get really frustrated at this. And she wants Jesus to let her know that her busyness is good, that her serving is good, that all the things that she has on the go and how she's juggling them all is really good and to be celebrated. And Jesus comes back with a remark, and he doesn't say that what she's doing isn't good, but he takes a moment to shift the focus and to celebrate Mary. And he celebrates Mary in her ability and her desire to be present and to listen and to engage in the moment that she's in. And I think Jesus celebrates it in this moment because if we look at any story in the scripture, Jesus always becomes present to the moment that he was in, whether it's in healings of the blind or the lame or the lepers, or in conversations like the woman at the well or the woman caught in adultery. He was fully engaged. There was a conversation, there was talking, and there was revealing that went back and forth. And what is most intriguing to me is that in those stories, those who are engaged with Jesus back, who reciprocate it, they get the most out of Jesus, like the woman at the well. And we see that interaction, and we watch how that unfolds. But those that aren't engaged, we look at the rich young ruler, which we looked at last week. He couldn't be fully engaged in a moment because he was tied to something. He had his mind on other things. He was concerned about his money, that he had to leave something behind to enter fully into a moment that Jesus was calling him to. I think the Pharisees were the same way. They were tied to a way of living, and they refused to budge in that and be present to what was going on in the culture around them. And so I think they missed something massive because they refused to step into the moment, to be present, and to engage. The stories, can go on. We see them all throughout the Gospels as we look at the life of Jesus, that Jesus was present to the moments that he was in. And those who were present back, they got to experience the full love and grace of Jesus that he came to proclaim to the world around him. And I think this is an incredibly important thing for us to reflect on as a culture, because we live and engage in a culture that is full of distractions. We live and engage in a culture that doesn't have time for interruptions. We live and engage in a culture that we're always on a mission. Everyone's got some place to go and something to do. And I think this even happens to us as a church on Sundays at times, where we open the doors, we swing them open on a Sunday, and we swing them open to Jesus. And we, like Martha, ask for opportunity to learn from him, to have him in our presence. But we never put down the checklist and fully enter into the moment that we're a part of. We get caught up in what we have to do for work on Monday morning, or the big projects that are due, or the things that are going on in the lives of our kids, or what we're eating for lunch following the service. And so it becomes extremely difficult to be fully present in our culture. And now technology is not helping us become any more present. It might be helping us get connected in some different ways, but it's not helping us be more present, because we live in a culture where 3 out of 4 people are admitting to being rude at one point or another because they're engaging with technology with other people in their presence. And I'm the first to admit I'm guilty of that, but I have the greatest accountability partner in my 2-year-old son, who is understanding, even in his, short time of understanding how life works, he understands that relationships aren't to be interrupted. You're to be present, to engage in them. And so if emails come in or texts come in and I pull my phone out while him and I are playing or doing an activity together, he simply looks at me and says, "Daddy, put pocket." And it's been...
Is that why he broke your TV?
That's why he broke my TV as well. And so now we're really just spending time together. But he understands something, and it's been really profound in my own life. You see, because as culture as a whole, with technology and how it's always advancing and we're getting more things in the palm of our hands, we're being pulled out of reality. And we're being launched into a world of what we think is being connected, and we're thinking is interaction, but is a false reality that's ultimately leaving people more depressed. And that's what we're seeing. And so being present in today's culture is one of the biggest fights that we're going to have as a people. Because everything is at our fingertips. We have access to it at all times of the day. And we may, live in a culture that says we can multitask, which is why we'll try to text while maintaining a regular conversation with a real person in front of us. If you want to see how that works, come Wednesday night and watch our students. But it's ultimately destroying the ability to build meaningful relationships. Because meaningful relationships, they take time, they take energy. They're a messy process. They take us being fully present. There's no app for relationships, as much as we may like one. And this has become extremely hard for our culture. I mean, just imagine, the feeding of the 5,000 in a world today when everyone's got smartphones, where Jesus sits on the hillside and he asks everyone to sit down in their groups, and they do, and they all have their heads buried in their phones while they're somewhat carrying conversations on in their groups. And these baskets come around, and they would have grabbed, the fish and the bread and not even noticed the miracle that Jesus had just done for them, because they wouldn't have even engaged and been present to the moment. They probably would have just assumed they had this much food to begin with. They would have said, "Wow, this is incredible. That's a lot of food." Then they would have taken a picture of it for Instagram. And you have to make sure you put the most important hashtag, which is blessed, on Instagram. But imagine, right? The people in that moment, them being fully present to what was going on around them and engaging with the world around them, allowed them to see what actually was going on. They actually got to see how incredible this feeding was. Why? Because they were fully present to the moment that they were in. And the truth is that this is the beauty of conversation, is that the fullness of it is experienced when everyone is present, whether it's putting technology away or finding a way to remove the checklists in our lives and simply sit and focus in on what's going on around us. But this is the constant struggle that we fight. We wrestle with work. What's going on? We're always on a mission. We're always in a virtual world, or sometimes, we forget to be present to the moment we're in because we're too busy trying to capture the moment for social media that we still miss it. See, whatever it may be, the greatest part for me of Jesus, and we see it in Mary, and it's what Jesus is applauding in this moment, she becomes present to a moment that she's in. And Jesus, like I mentioned, always does this, which is why I think his teaching became more powerful. Because to be fully present to a moment is to tell a person something. It tells them that they're worth your time, which means that they're valuable. You value them. And so to be in a distracted culture and living that way and not being present sends a message, whether we mean it or not, that might just say that person's not actually valuable to us, or they're not worth our full attention or our time, things that we value. You see, this is something that I think as a culture, as technology advances, is going to become a potentially life-changing thing for someone, is to say that you're worth it, so you have my attention, and I'm going to be present to this moment. This is already starting to mean more and more for people when we actually don't ever pull out our cell phones in conversation, whatever it may be. And so I would suspect that many of us, we could probably use a little more Mary, if we're honest, in our lives, and a little less of Martha.
I find myself wondering, 3 out of 4 people have admitted at some point in their life to being rude in a conversation because they're on cell phone. The 4th person, were they on their phone when the question was asked? And
Probably.
and unable to engage with it.
Yeah, they missed the question entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading a newspaper article yesterday about the plans that are afoot in Buckingham Palace for the coronation of King Charles when the Queen, eventually passes. And one of the Queen's secretaries bemoaning the fact that every page that you see in a newspaper, unlike from the Queen's coronation when there's all these happy people waving flags, it's going to be lots of people like this. You're not actually going to see their faces, because every picture of a big event now we see, people are watching it through their phones rather than just being present in the event happening. Bob, when you were talking, I was thinking about this language of presence that Tyson talked about in your conversation about conversation. As a pastor, how do you think that affects us when it comes to prayer? Or how does prayer maybe help us with this? Are you able to talk a little bit about that?
So I want to say and underline and reiterate and remind that prayer is our greatest privilege. It's an awesome thing to be able to pray. But I think we pray badly when we think of it as informing God of data he didn't know. So think of it, let's think of it again as, the phrase that's been used for the modern psychology movement is the talking cure, that human beings need to talk. But I just want to say that that's true. Before we had psychologists and blessed psychologists and counselors and pastors and but, there was the sense where if you needed to talk, you'd go work with your Uncle Ned who's repairing the fence on the, back 40 there and work it out while you fix the fence and talk it through, because we need to talk. Talk is a cure. It is a cure for our souls. And what I want to say about prayer is we need to pray. If we need to talk, we need to pray. Hosea said, take words and return to the Lord. And I just really want to just underline that. And we say we don't know how to do it. So I'll just tell you, here's how you do it. You get into a place where no one's listening and you just start to actually verbalize something. Here's how I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. Just start to do that and let that healing come that happens when we're in the presence of God I often think about, the way human relationships work. If you're in relationship, you talk, and if it's broken, you say, oh, we're not talking, right? Oh, we're not talking anymore. This is the sad thing. If we stop that relationship with God, we're out of that loop of communion. And so all we want to say is, church, take your privilege. We need to talk with each other. We need to talk with God. That's how we heal as human beings.
Do you think that, so I'm thinking about when I have relationships that go through hard times, which, and people don't want to talk to me, and which I know no one will ever not want to talk to you, Bob, but, I have this trouble. No, and where, so you're in a relationship, and then for some reason you fall out, and you stop talking. And as you say, that's when you know something's up, when the certain person doesn't call, or they don't talk, or you don't talk to them, But then what I've found is the longer you allow that not talking to happen, it gets harder and harder to start the conversation again, to the point that it sometimes becomes impossible. Like, where on earth do I start talking? Do you think that we are like that with God sometimes, that we stop, we maybe get out of the discipline of prayer, or we never start that discipline, and then it kind of gets, it gets harder. How do you get back into it?
So I quoted Hosea there, take words and return to the Lord. What would you say in your imagination if you were, break down the mystery of it and just in a room to verbalize it? I think it matters that we allow it to come out of our lungs and not just prayer thoughts, but prayer words. So try it, start to verbalize something, and then see if the rush of words doesn't start to come, because often it does. It just pours out of us. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
And maybe this leads to your areas as well, Tyson. I was thinking about, how often when I pray, even if I try and not do the sort of shopping list of things God already knows, and how easy it is to get out of that conversation. And that would be true in my prayer life, but also be true in my conversational life. That little ding that appears in the background of all of our lives, ding, that you all of a sudden realize something's happening on my phone. And it must be important because it dinged. So all of a sudden, conversations with the people that are most precious to you start to fade into the background while you try to imagine what amazing picture of food someone is posting online. I nearly set fire to my kitchen once because I turned the pan on, put the oil in, and then the ding happened, and I was drawn away from the stove, and then it all went. It was a good pan that got lost to the whole ding, But so you talked recently. I know you did a seminar here at Westside just a couple of weeks ago about the impact of technology in our life. And do you want to unpack a little bit more that the damage that's perhaps happening is more than just a pan getting burned, but actually there's something quite serious going on with this technology and presence piece.
Sure. Yeah, and you can really get drowned in information. And the truth is we're all in the first kind of study group, if you will, as far as what it's really doing to us, because smartphones haven't been out that long, although they feel like they've been around for forever. But lots of the studies been done on millennials, or Generation Z, or I generation is kind of what they're calling them with smartphones. And there's a couple things. The first is that if you just look at how they're connecting and how conversation is being built, it's mostly over a keyboard, which creates problems in a sexting and cyberbullying world because everyone feels like they can be more bold behind a keyboard, but it's also taking away from meaningful relationships in the sense that the average person, at least in the millennial I generation, sends about 3,900 text messages a month, which works down to be about 130 a day. And so if they're actually getting 8 hours of sleep, it's working out to be 1 every 7 minutes. That's really hard to gain any traction in conversations when every 7 minutes you're now jumping back into a phone from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. So we're seeing that happening, that we can't find time for conversation. We're having problems even learning how to build them because we don't have to do anything in real life, not even really dating anymore, right? People just swipe right, boom, they're a stud. And they just carry on with life. They don't have to stutter over that. The other big one that we're finding is the dopamine release. So it's considered the happy drug. It's highly numbing, highly addictive. It's the same amount of dopamine is released in social media engagement, technology engagement, as we're seeing with when people drink, gamble, and smoke. And now there's age restrictions on drinking, gambling, and smoking, but there's nothing on interacting with our technology, which is becoming extremely problematic because addicts come in contact with their vice normally in their adolescent years. And so what's happening is kids are coming in contact with social media and technology in their adolescent years, which is giving them a dopamine rush, which is allowing them to now turn back to these things in times when they really should be learning and developing meaningful relationships, which is becoming just an extremely messy process of how do you push back and fight against that.
So then we find ourselves talking about a rabbi from a few thousand years ago who came alongside us and spent time with us and talked to us, was present to us, and invited people to be present to us. And here we are in the kind of high-tech, technologically advanced Western world, realizing that maybe this rabbi from a few thousand years ago could teach us a thing or two that we should listen well too. I want to set you a challenge for this week, if you're up for it. It's a tough challenge. It goes against many of the principles that we're used to, but hopefully some of the things we're talking about today. I'd love for you to talk to 2 new people this week. That's your kingdom of God, Jesus following call. Maybe it's that guy that you commute next to on the train. You know, you're getting the tram into town and, you know, you see that guy. I used to get a train to work and, you know, you would see this guy and like, oh, look, he's got a new bag. And, oh, look, he's got a new coat. And I don't know what his name is, but, you know, but I feel like I know him and I see him all the time and I never talk to him. And there'll be people in your life that you pass that you've never had a meaningful conversation with. And here we follow this Jesus who was present in our space, talk to us and listen to us. So I want to challenge you to find 2 new meaningful conversations. But I'm not going to let you off the hook that easily. You've got to find one of them when I say goodbye. Why don't you talk to someone at Westside you've never talked to before, right? For some of you, talking to new people is terrifyingly scary. For some of us, being talked to by new people is terrifyingly scary. For some of us, listening is the hard bit. But just here we are, this community of people trying to follow Jesus. Why don't you just say hey to someone that you've not said hey to before and just try and have a conversation with them that you're present in that might replicate something of what it means for us to follow Jesus as one another. Let's pray. Jesus, a God of talking and a God of listening. There are many words that we could speak, that we need to speak, perhaps many words that we shouldn't speak. But we speak them to you from whom no secrets can be hid. To you who's beyond us, to you who is with us, to you who is for us. To you who has ears bent close to our lips. Jesus, God of talking, God of listening. Be with us. Amen. May God's grace and peace be on you. Remember to say hi to someone.